Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here for this session. We're about to start. So I'd like to ask you all to please turn off your cell phones or at least put them on silent. And we'd also prefer it if you'd refrain from speaking during the session itself as it disturbs the panelists. We're here for a book launch of a book titled The Pakistan Anti-Hero: History of Pakistani Nationalism Through the Lives of Iconoclasts by Nadeem Paracha. Introducing Nadeem will be Hamna Zubair. Hamna Zubair is the editor of images.dawn.com and a writer who contributes to Salon, The Huffington Post, and various Pakistani publications. She was co-curator of the unpublished reading series in New York, where she has also worked in the publishing industry. Hamna.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Nadeem, who actually needs no introduction, I'm sure, right? He is he's a leading journalist, culture critic. He's worked in journalism for years and years across basically every major publication in Pakistan and with every leading editor, I would say. This is his second book. It's titled The Pakistan Anti-Hero. And it's about the history of Pakistani nationalism, the changing shape of Pakistani identity through profiles of people who we think we know, and also little-known characters who we would never have known if Nadeem had not brought them to life in this book. I thought it would be good to start by reading a very short section of the introduction. Now, I begged Nadeem to read this introduction for us, but Nadeem, okay. So I'll read a bit of the introduction for you. So Nadeem says, the generation of young Pakistanis today is now completely disconnected from the original notions of their country's nationalism, because in the past few decades, Pakistani students in educational institutions were more exposed to ideas of a hybrid pan-Islamic version of Pakistani nationalism. In Pakistan, a young millennial is not quite sure what being a Pakistani now means. Does it mean being a citizen of a Muslim-majority nation in South Asia, which evolved on the banks of River Indus and is part of the region's 5,000-year-old history? Or does it mean being a native of some approaching global Islamic setup, or someone who should just see Pakistan as a temporary abode to mark time until that universal setup emerges? Is he or she first a Pakistani and then a Muslim, or vice versa? And what exactly is the status of the non-Muslim citizens of Pakistan? So as you can see, these questions that Nadeem is raising in the book are very relevant to us today. Who are we, in a transnational, globalized world? And I think my first question to Nadeem is going to be, Nadeem, this book kind of explores the changing face of Pakistani nationalism through a lot of characters, personalities, some of whom we know, like Fatma Jinnah, some of whom we don't know, like friends you've made throughout your activism, in your student years, and throughout your career in journalism. Now, what do you think it means to be an anti-hero? And why did you choose these people? And can you also kind of introduce us to some of the people we'll come across in this book?
Yeah, by anti-hero, I've explained, as I explained in the book, a people who are multidimensional. I mean, everybody is an anti-hero if we see the whole thing. But in my book, I've sort of commented on and investigated the lives of well-known people as well, politicians, sportsmen, and some obscure personalities as well. To me, both of them are multidimensional. Both of them have their own vulnerabilities. And I thought that they haven't been studied in this manner. we always get a very one-dimensional portrayal of people like, let's say, Fatma Jinnah or Iqbal. And but once I started doing that, I realized that these guys are almost exactly the same, at least in this context, as the obscure personalities I've discussed. You know, what people really don't know about, which I met as a journalist or as at a college. They all have the same drawbacks, same advantages, same vulnerabilities, same emotional problems, same, you know. So that to me is an anti-hero, because hero to me has become an extremely one-dimensional concept. And we live in a world of anti-heroes now. There are no heroes as such.
Could you pick up maybe on one personality you've profiled and kind of talk us through how your process of getting to know their complexity came forward, and how you found out all these details about them?
Each one, like, of course, there's a lot of literature out there. For example, when I was investigating Iqbal, you know, at college and otherwise, we sort of get a very one-dimensional portrayal of the man as a philosopher, poet, and the guy who dreamed up Pakistan. You know, when I started sort of investigating his work, through his own work, of course, and then the literature available, which comments on other aspects of Iqbal as well. Iqbal as a personality, as a human being, as a husband, as a person who enjoyed Qawwali, and stuff like that. So basically, and it's all out there. All one needs to do is go out and start gathering the information. And this information we'll never get at colleges, schools, and of course on state-owned or any other sort of media as well. So I went around and I utilized Dawn's library, the archives bit. That's a fantastic place to go and sort of do your research. So that is where much of my work took place, at Dawn's library.
So I was going to ask this question later, but it's become relevant now. I feel like a lot of people read Nadeem's columns and they come away with this perception that he is a bit hard-edged, maybe a little bit sarcastic, maybe he has a mean streak, you know? But in this book, what I thought was really interesting is that he seems to have a lot of empathy. He's looked at people who we might consider villains, or we might consider, traditional bad guys, and he's kind of looked into their psychology and figured out, okay, well, why did they become like this? For example, Abdul Rashid Ghazi, who of Lal Masjid, there's a section on him which was very interesting. So Nadeem, I guess my question is, how did you find this store of empathy which made you kind of really want to examine even people who we might have already made up our minds about?
Well,
and how can we as readers cultivate that same kind of curiosity and empathy?
I think it's also a personal thing. Growing up, and again, I keep repeating the word one-dimensional. I think a lot of that has been said about me on social sites and everywhere else, and still does. It's still very one-dimensional. And the way I've sort of studied these guys, I would like sort of someone to study me in that manner, you know, with some empathy and understanding, instead of just one-dimensional ideas about, you know, he's left or he's right or he's crazy, you know. So the whole thing came from there, basically. I studied them the way I would like myself to be studied, if I'm worth it.
So moving a little bit into the content of the book, you've said that young Pakistanis can maybe gain a better understanding of their place in the country and their ideas of identity and nationalism by looking at the very early ideas of Pakistani nationalism before they were muddied by, Islamism and other agendas. So can you shed light on what this early nationalism kind of was and what you mean by this?
I think early nationalism was inclusive. It was it was far more open-ended, and it, like I said, inclusive, and that it could have evolved into something rather progressive, I believe. But unfortunately, due to the 1971 East Pakistan debacle, that early project, how it could have evolved, that sort of got sidelined. And what I've used the word, the divergence started happening from the mid 1970s, where the whole concept of nationalism in Pakistan became very narrow. You know, it was widespread, and there was a lot of experimentation and thinking going on before that, when suddenly everything was closed up. You know, and the evolution was retarded, and we sort of set out to explain ourselves and our nationalism in a manner which I think the founders wouldn't have liked or didn't think about. So that's what I mean by why we need to sort of rediscover how this nationalism was built, where it was going, and sort of update it and communicate it to the new generation, which has grown up learning a very distorted, very narrow, myopic understanding of Pakistani nationalism. That needs to be tackled. That's what my thing in this book was also. I think if you go back to the original forms of nationalism in Pakistan, which I said had the ability or had the potential to evolve into something far more better, it can still be sort of brought back, and can solve a lot of problems that we are facing at the identity crisis and so much else, of course.
But do you think nationalism is the best way to kind of go forward with an identity? I mean, so much we've become so wary of nationalism as a point at which you form your identity, because as we've seen, it can become so divisive, so bitter, so angry, so violent. So is that really the right course to take, or is there some other point around which we can kind of form our identity?
Well, we still live in nation states, and we can only survive as a nation state. If we take out the whole nationalism equation out of it, then there's no purpose of a nation state, especially a state like Pakistan, which is made up of so many ethnicities and religions and sects. I think nationalism still has a role to play, and I myself call myself a Pakistani nationalist, but I don't see a problem. I think nationalism still has a lot to deliver, and especially again, I repeat, for a country like Pakistan, with so much diversity, there are so many commonalities as well, and that is where nationalism comes in, sort of defines these commonalities, while at the same time respecting the diversity.
There's a lot more we can talk about on that topic, but let me go into it through the story of your friend Haris. I think he was, right? Okay, so there's a very interesting story at the end of the book. It's about a friend of Nadeem's called Haris. Let me just pull it up. And the section, the profile is titled An Ambiguous Man, right? Now, when I read this profile of Haris, who Nadeem describes as an old college buddy of mine back in the mid-1980s, he went through a lot, this Haris person went through a lot of ideological shifts. I'll let Nadeem tell the story, but I thought it very closely mirrored the kind of internal struggles that every Pakistani has gone through with every political and ideological change in Pakistan. So Nadeem, could you tell us about Haris?
It's a fascinating character. Haris was with me at college back in the 1980s, and we were both members of a progressive student group. But Haris came from a very conservative background, very conservative Urdu-speaking family. His father, I remember, used to sort of, these are the Cold War years, used to hate communists, people were called Surkhas. But Haris sort of was part of our group, and he used to also take a very keen interest in used to participate in our anti-US rallies in those days. Again, I repeat, it was Cold War years. And but after college, I think met him at the press club when I had joined journalism in 1991, and I found out that Haris had actually, after college, gone to Afghanistan in 1988. So I asked Haris, I said, you went there to sort of fight for the remaining Soviet-backed regime in Kabul. He said, no, I went there to fight with Gul Hamid Hikmatyar. You know, so that came as a shock. So Haris' cousin was also a friend of mine. So I said, what the heck was that? He said, Haris had joined the left-wing organization at college to spite his father, because his father and they didn't get along. So, and then after college, he went to Afghanistan to make his father happy. So I asked his cousin, but the father was happy. He said, no, father was petrified, you know, like he didn't want that. He just wanted his son to be sort of just grow a beard, be pious, and just have a job. So Haris got it wrong both ways. So after a long time again, I was, I think, in Dubai. This is about in 2013, I'm not sure. Haris's cousin SMSs me, and he says that Haris is, okay, before that, sorry, Haris went to the US in the late 1990s, and he sort of started living with at Seattle with one of his uncles who used to sort of have a chain of grocery stores there. So Haris was there, and I met Haris about 15 years ago, and I said that I don't understand, like, and he had joined the Tabligh Jamaat in Seattle. So I said, yeah, kya hai bhai? So he said that you don't understand, the West, the Americans are far more tolerant, far more accepting about what we do than we are. I said, well, that's good, great. Anyways, 2-3 years ago, again, Haris' cousin calls me, and I was in Dubai. He said, if you're in Dubai, Haris is around. I said, where is Haris? Where around? He said, he's in Kuwait. I said, is he visiting there? He said, no, he now lives in Kuwait and sort of runs a business there. I said, what happened to Seattle? I said, he said, he didn't like it. I said, what do you mean he didn't like it, you know? He said that, Haris thought that it wasn't right, so he shifted to Kuwait with his family. I said, but he thought that the Americans were very open-minded. But his cousin said, yes, they are, but Haris isn't. So that was the ambiguous man, and he's still in Kuwait, I think.
So through stories like this, you can see how individuals, you know, on the one hand, he was left-leaning, then he went to Afghanistan to fight with the religious right, then he thought the United States was great and tolerant, then he flipped again and thought, wait, this is actually really intolerant, I'm going to move to the Arab states. So it kind of really represents the shifts that, you know, a Pakistani goes through, or that we as a Pakistani state go through. So I thought that was really fascinating, and the book is kind of filled with these small profiles which give you that insight. So do go and pick it up. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask you about the process of writing this book. Now, this isn't your first book. Nadeem wrote another book recently, which was called The End of the Past. So you've been a journalist and a writer all your life, writing short pieces for newspapers and magazines. So how did this transition from journalist to author take place? How long were you thinking about it? And did you find that the institutions in Pakistan were helpful when you wanted to write a book, or were they not supportive?
Well, I always wanted to I always knew that I was writing so much for newspapers, especially Dawn the last 15 years. I've been like producing stuff regularly, weekly, 2 columns. And I always knew that time is coming where sort of I have to get the book out of my system. So, ek nahi, do nikal aaye. So, that was always on the cards. As far as the process is concerned and the publishing, I was told horror stories that Pakistani publishers are pathetic. They don't sort of publish you. I mean, they publish you, there are no royalties, etc., etc. I was also approached by a few Indian publishers because they thought that I have a readership in India as well, so they were interested. But I was really disappointed by them because the idea they had about me, and I shared some of my stuff with them, but they said, "Nee, yaar, just keep writing satire." I said, "Listen, satire as a blog can work for 2 days and that's it. You cannot sort of transform it into a book. And I'm not a fiction writer, you know. I have nothing against fiction writers really, but anyways, I was very disappointed by the Indians. Najam Sethi is sort of a friend as well. So I said that I have this thing and you've got Vanguard books. Are you interested? He said, more than sure, I'm interested. So he got the book out, the first one, within I think 3-4 months. And that was one perception that sort of changed. The second was, after about 6-7 months, I got a pretty hefty, pretty reasonable royalty check. I have been told that people don't get it over here, and that was another surprise. So I decided to do another book for Vanguard. So let's see how this one goes. So it's not that bad, really.
What about, how do you find time for this? Because you are also, by the way, he also has a full-time job. He writes a couple of columns every week for Dawn. And then obviously he's, engaged in his own intellectual discussions with everyone in the community. So that takes up a lot of time. But how did you find time to actually put these two books together in, I think, the space of what, 3-4 years?
No, I would say about a year and a half. You're writing for Dawn always helps because, like I said, I've been producing so much stuff for them. It was already out there. But of course, in column writing, you don't have so much space to expand. So the main seeds were there, the ideas were there. All I needed to do was just pick them up and expand them. And I enjoy writing, and that's no problem. Taking out time to write has never been a problem for me. So the ideas were there already. All I needed to do was just expand them, basically.
Okay, and when you kind of did get into the process of writing the book, in yesterday's session, in one session that I sat in, Haris Khalik actually said something very interesting. He said, we're in a country where there are so many problems, and often you feel like you will never be able to fix these problems. So as a writer, you constantly have to battle this question. You ask yourself, why am I writing? And is it going to fix anything? So why bother? So I kind of want to pose that to you because you've been writing for decades now. Why do you keep on? Do you see any change taking place? Why?
Absolutely. The sort of feedback I get, especially for example, every year I'm here at KLF for one session or the other, and most of the people who actually come and are readers, it surprises me, the sort of young men from universities and colleges, some men coming from in the interior of Sindh, Balochistan, young people, and they say they've been reading me, and they're looking for answers. I don't have the answers. At least I have, I think, over the years developed some certain sort of questions which they can ask, because you cannot get the answer until you ask the right questions. So that is extremely encouraging. And again, when the article gets published on the Dawn News site, the sort of comments that come in, so that is encouraging. I think I am making a change. That keeps me going. I've never been cynical about that, and I've always been rather an optimist. And there is a hunger to ask the right question, and that keeps me going.
Yeah, and that actually goes back to what I said in the beginning, which is that people see you as a cynic, but I think actually you're optimistic about the country, and you want to encourage people to think and ask the right questions.
That's an interesting thing you said, that I think I end up disappointing a lot of people as well, because I remember last year we were on during the satire session, there was a lady who stood up and said that, why aren't you sort of being so bitchy anymore? I said, because it's unhealthy. So, but yeah, like I said, there's so many dimensions to a single personality. All
So
needs to be sort
do
of
you
used.
think that as you've grown older, you've become less bitchy? And why is that?
I think it's the other way around. So I'm actually, it's reverse for, as far as I'm concerned. I'm getting very nice.
Okay, so I actually wanted to have enough time for questions, maybe 10 minutes for questions. And just before we go into that, I wanted to tell you that there are a lot of interesting personalities in this book. There are also contemporary personalities like Misbah-ul Haq, Essam, the tennis player. So, you know, and Nadeem has a lot of stories. So if you want to pick on some personality and ask him questions about that, that would also be great. But yeah, we can open the floor.
Hi. My question was that, the idea that you're saying that, he's bitchy. The point is that isn't truth always straightforward and cutthroat and sort of bitchy? And the fact that you've been straightforward and honest, why is that being seen as bitchy? And, over the period of time, why is it being expected that you'll stop being bitchy or you'll stop being honest? You know what I mean? Did you hear it?
Well, interesting. No, bitchy, I think, is when you sort of become personal. If you say that the sky is red, for example, or sky is blue, well, that's the truth. You see it in a poetic manner and a nice manner. If you say the sky is blue and I don't give a shit about anybody else, who said it's red or something like that, I don't think truth is definitely straightforward. It can hurt. Well, one doesn't really have to be bitchy about it. One can be witty about it. Sometimes I think being witty or sarcastic, or let's just say witty, that is also sort of mistaken as being bitchy or not nice. So I think there's a difference.
Hi, Nadeem. Nawab Bukti famously said, "I've been a Balochi for several centuries. I've been a Muslim for 1700 years. I've been only a Pakistani for 50 years." And I think that's quite an enlightening comment, because it shows the sort of priority that many people in this country put on their sense of identity. And for him, he was a Balochi first and foremost, then Muslim, and then very much at the end, a Pakistani. And so my question to you is how prevalent do you think Pakistani nationalism actually is or was in Pakistan?
Well, again, like I said, and I've discussed this in the book as well, that it was evolving as an all-inclusive thing. It could have evolved into something better, but after the East Pakistan debacle, it became very narrow, and that is when we start hearing things like what Nawab Bukti said, and even Wali Khan also said, and they felt ignored, they felt isolated, because the whole idea of Pakistani nationalism became so narrow that everybody thought that it's only about Punjabis now, which I personally think wasn't true. They became a majority, yes, but I think that is what went wrong. Had it sort of evolved the way it was supposed to, I think things could have been much better. Like I said, there are certain commonalities both Bukti Saab and I have, because I'm half Punjabi, Bukti Saab is Balochi, but there are certain commonalities, that is the region, the 5,000-year history of the region, and the religion. There is commonalities, so that nationalism has to respect that, and at the same time respect ethnic diversity and other diversities. But that didn't happen. That's why we started hearing the grumblings became so loud amongst various ethnicities, starting with the Bengalis, of course.
Assalamu alaikum. Nadeem Saab, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. A, for me, the term anti-hero refers to people who are willing to challenge the conventional stereotypes. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, when I was growing up, I remember that there were a lot of people that I used to look up to. They were intellectually, I felt very superior, and there were such personalities across a wide array of fields, be it media, be it sports, and yet, I feel that our society has regressed to a point now where we don't see such people anymore. Why do you think that's happened? And also, by anti-hero, are you referring to people these days who are willing to, sort of challenge the conventional stereotype, as I said, or willing to go against the state narrative? Is that how you define that term?
Not really, not really. Even for example, it's not really a rebel I'm talking about, at least in the book. Anti-heroes are not really exactly rebels in a conventional sense. They're still out there. These sort of people are still out there. Like I said, they're not rebels, but it's how you see them, and they're not afraid maybe to sort of exhibit their emotional vulnerabilities, exhibit other sort of weaknesses and advantages, because they want to be treated as human beings in the end. Everybody does. Not as some icon or not as some superhero, you know. So, but to your question, are these sort of people still out there? Of course, each one of us is that. Each one of us is that.
Hi. Hello. So, why do you think, you think nationalism is the way forward, and nationalism is basically a concept, and nationalism has also led to a lot of adverse events in Pakistan. Don't you think that the mindset should be improved in a way that people start to criticize ideas first and then think about nationalism?
Of course. Why not? Any idea or any ideology or any concept has had good results, has produced good results or bad results. Nationalism, like Nazis were nationalists as well. You know, it depends how you treat them, how you sort of construct them, and how they evolve. And yes, of course, questions have to be asked, especially with the sort of nationalism that's took over after 1971. Definitely, that needs to be discarded right away, because that has created such huge complexities and problems, psychological including, for a lot of people, you know. So, of course, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Waqas Javed. I'm assuming that you will have a chapter regarding Allama Iqbal in your book. So, I want to ask you about Allama Iqbal. He is so enigmatic that every kind of person, everyone likes him. Whether he's liberal, whether he's secular, whether he's conservative, whether he's orthodox, everyone likes him. So it is not normal that a person has been loved by everyone, whether what kind of ideology one possesses. So this is very enigmatic about Iqbal. So I want to ask you, what's your take on it? Who was Iqbal?
That's excellent, because this is exactly the phenomena I have studied. Because why has Iqbal ended up, you know, getting a lot of leftists, rightists, liberals, Maulvis, whatever, excited? Everybody uses him. That's exactly what I've discovered. That was the thing of understanding Iqbal as a human being, you know. And because you see, in the end, I've also quoted one of the shares of Iqbal, which I'm not going to repeat over here because I'm going to screw up. But where he says, even Iqbal doesn't know who Iqbal is, you know. So that is what Iqbal is, and that is the sort of a personality I try to sort of find out why this is so. Like Jamaat Islami quotes him. Faiz Saab used to quote him, you know, and when we used to be so-called Marxists, we used to quote him. So he's a fascinating personality.
But why did so many different people used to quote him?
Like I said, because Iqbal kept changing. Iqbal used to contradict himself, but he used to, in the end, that's what I realized, celebrate that contradiction, because he believed that made a person dynamic. He wasn't scared of being contradictory. One shouldn't really. And that made him dynamic.
Hi. Nadeem, my question is that what could be the process of changing the status quo of the nationalism, number one. And number two, how can we include those who are the torchbearer of current nationalism right now?
First of all, उनको तो ये current torchbearers को TV से तो हटा देना चाहिए ना फौरन. You know, it's going to happen. Like, for example, there's so much talk after the tragic APS thing about NAP and changing the mindset and everything. At least, ये तो पहले ये था भी नहीं, but now it's at least that thinking is there that something went really wrong. We screwed up. with the sort of narrative we had developed about our faith and our country. At least that realization has come in. It'll take a lot of time because there's going to be a lot of barriers. There are a lot of people who wouldn't like that to happen because the change jo laye the, they had worked so hard to sort of totally replace that. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen naturally, and it has to happen if Pakistan has to survive. I believe it will survive, but this has to happen. Of course, there's going to be a lot of cynicism. Ke nahi hoga, nahi change hoga. It's too early for that. पंजाबी माइंडसेट पंजाबी से पूछ रहे हैं नहीं पंजाबी माइंडसेट का कोई मसला नहीं आई टेल यू वी हैव बीन और मैं खुद इन्वॉल्व रहा हूँ इतना ज़्यादा ऑल सॉर्ट्स ऑफ मूवमेंट्स में ज़िया के ज़माने में बट आई से टेल यू देयर सो मेनी मिथ्स क्रिएट हो गई ठीक है ना जो हम दे हैव बिकम वी बीन बर्डन बाय मिथ्स वी बीन ट्रैप्ड बाय देम कि पंजाबी जलील है और वो उससे पहले बंगाली ये था बलोच ये है वो ये हमने बना ली हैं मिथ्स ठीक है कहीं हद तक ठीक भी होंगी लेकिन वी हैव बीन ट्रैप्ड बाय दैट हम उससे निकल नहीं रहे मौलवी जो है जो राइट विंग है वो अपने ट्रिप्स में वो उसको बचा के रखता है जो सो कॉल्ड लेफ्ट है जो लिबरल वो उसको बचा के रखता है आप कोई बीच का चीज़ पकड़ें तो दोनों आपको अटैक करते हैं आप बीन फेसिंग दैट दोनों तरफ से अटैक आपको आता है तो पहले तो हमें ये को लिबरेट करना पड़ेगा पहले ये रिवाइव करना पड़ेगा कि यार ये रिव्यू हर चीज़ हमने करनी पड़ेगी क्योंकि वाकई ये कमीना था वाकई ये मजलूम है ऑल दीज थिंग्स विल टेक टाइम
One last question, please. We have somebody here.
Nadeem Sahab, my name is Humaira, and I wanted to say that narrative is very powerful, language is very powerful, words are very powerful. Would it not help, rather than refer to ourselves as a nation state, which you did a little while earlier, would it not help to reiterate and repeat again and again that we're a federation of nations? Would it not help it become more inclusive, our nationalism?
Yes, why not? But again, we're 70 years old. Not that young, I would say, because that has also become such a cliche that we are young. But I think it's still too early. Because वो एक डर है हमारे स्टेट के अंदर कि अगर हम अपने आप को फेडरेशन कह देंगे जब वो ब्लेटेंटली हर एथनिसिटी को हम लोग अपना रिकग्नाइज करेंगे तो उनमें से क्लीवलेजेस हो जाएंगे देखो बांग्लादेश में ये हो गया फिर सिंधी निकल जाएगा बलोचिस्तान निकल जाएगा कुछ नहीं रहेगा आई थिंक अभी इट्स स्टिल टू अर्ली आई थिंक वी स्टिल हैव टू फर्स्ट बी अ नेशन स्टेट बिकॉज नेशन स्टेट बनने से पहले वी वांटेड टू बी अ खलीफा हमें चाहिए था खिलाफत बनने के चक्रों में हो गए हम
On the contrary, the strongest nation states, which are multinational in character, are the ones that became strong as nation states by recognizing their federations and they are multinational.
No, I agree. Like I said,
so
I agree.
if you wait first for the, like you said, we'll have to wait for that. We have to first identify ourselves as a nation state,
Yes.
and then we can, further allow ourselves to be more diverse and more voices coming forth. I think it's the opposite. I think recognizing that a lot of young people don't know, for example, that the 1940 resolution was a coming together of nation states, actually. Yes, post-colonial, but was coming together of nation states to form a federation. People don't know that. I heard yesterday in a session a very senior diplomat say in 1947, Mr. Hilali, in 1947, West and East Pakistan came together to form a country, which is not true. It was not like that at all. So the more we recognize our origins and history and why we came together and strengthen the multinational character of the country, the stronger we'll become, not the other way around.
I agree, but for that, apni origin history, we have to agree on origins history because I've also heard yesterday that 1940 resolution was actually written by the British. So we have to understand. No, I agree. But we have to first agree, and say exactly what happened. That is understood, but now we have to see abhi kya situation hai. Abhi situation ye, which I've also mentioned, the young people, they really don't know nation state hota kya, Pakistan kya, because Pakistani आजकल young Pakistani अपने आप को पहले मुसलमान कहता है फिर पाकिस्तानी कहता है. अगर अपने आप को मुसलमान क्यों कहता है? Because he wants to be taken as part of some Muslim ummah, this imaginary thing. ठीक है ना? He doesn't realize that if he calls himself a Pakistani, that doesn't mean he won't be a Muslim. because of the divergence I was talking about. There was a divergence because you started defining your country not the way it was supposed to be defined. वो आपका भी concept हो सकता है how it should have been, मेरा अपना है. But after 1971, we weren't a nation state. We started, I don't know, like for example, when the Mughal downfall came, the khutbas in the mosques of Delhi and other parts of India started sort of praising the Ottomans, you know. That is when what Dr. Mubarak Ali says is that this whole thing about being related to Ummah started happening. हमारे यहाँ भी ये हुआ 71 के बाद ही, you know, we started relating more with the places like the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Arabic than our own roots, you know. So there's so much work to be done. So much work to be done. So that's what I mean.
Have we run out of time? Yeah? Okay, well, thank you, Nadeem. Welcome. And his book, The Pakistan Anti-Hero, will be available somewhere, so thanks.
Request that please do not come up on stage if you'd like to meet with Mr. Paracha. Perhaps we can find some place else. Thank you very much.